the head of mission studies and the head of the English department at a Christian university, talking about gaming. What a waste of time. Instead of gaming, shouldn't you guys be, reading your Bibles all the time and praying all the time and doing missions work all the time? And, gaming is just a distraction in your life away from those things.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Calvary Conversations. And so I am Joshua Paxton, director of the Burnham Center for Global Engagement here at Calvary University. And with me today is almost Dr. Timothy Hange. So cheer him on, folks. He's in the home stretch.
On the home stretch,
but we are coming at you today with a topic that's kind of near and dear to our hearts. So Tim and I are both we both self-identify as gamers. Gamers of many different kinds. We've done video games and board games and tabletop games. You name it. Well, if you name it, Tim has probably played it. I don't have exactly the repertoire of games under my belt as he does, but it is still a dream someday. My retirement plan would be to open a game shop / coffee shop. So, but maybe someday, who knows? Anyway, we've talked about this and we've discussed this topic, and it's something that we're really interested in, and so we want to talk to you today about Christians in games. So it has become increasingly over the past several years. I recall, well, do I say how old I am now? But anyway, in the 80s, if you were a gamer, if you had that label, it wasn't necessarily something that you wanted to be open and upfront about. But these days, gaming is incredibly popular. Whether it's video games, it's board games. There are game cafes, coffee shops. There's some here in Kansas City. There was one in my hometown, and so games have just been increasing in popularity a lot recently. And so how should we as believers develop a biblical perspective towards gaming? We might even include in that in leisure time. And so I'll draw a little bit of a comparison. We won't necessarily touch on this today, but while Christians typically are big proponents of sports, athletics events, those kind of things. We're in Kansas City. I've seen a few pastors preaching on Sunday wearing their Chiefs gear, and so. But in comparison, Christians tend to frown on video games, or at least abusive video games, or tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and some of those kinds of things. So, at best, they might be viewed as a waste of time. At worst, they might sometimes be labeled as demonic or playing around with the occult and occultic activities. And so this might end up being a whole series, but today we kind of want to zero in on what are some of the benefits of gaming. And so while there may be controversies, while there may definitely things we want to be aware of, how can gaming benefit us as believers? How can that be a positive for us?
Yeah.
So Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you. I kind of have some questions. We'll see how this conversation goes, but what are some of the benefits of gaming from your perspective?
Yeah, let me just echo this. I realize that there may be some people listening to this who are a bit skeptical right now, and who are sitting here wondering, oh my goodness, you're talking about the head of the missions studies and the head of mission studies and the head of the English department at a Christian university talking about gaming. What a waste of time. Instead of gaming, shouldn't you guys be, reading your Bibles all the time and praying all the time and doing missions work all the time? And, gaming is just a distraction in your life away from those things. I will admit that our lives are probably very different now than the first century Christians were, and in terms of
Yes.
the amount of free time that is available to us,
Yes.
and uh, but I think, I'm going to echo the words of Tim Keller here, about he talks a lot about disordered loves, that there are lots of things in our lives that can be good, but if they're disordered, you know, if God is not, if your family is above God, then you're going to be obsessive about your family. Your whole sense of self-esteem and self-worth is going to be placed on how your kids turn out, rather than, if God is first, you're going to be concerned about loving them and nurturing them, right? You see, it's the same way with gaming. If
Absolutely.
if God is first in your life and gaming is, well, okay, not second, but somewhere down there. Uh,
Let me stop you for 1 second. Because
uh-huh.
I honestly, I sometimes struggle with that illustration of first, second, third, fourth, etc., from a priority standpoint, when really shouldn't it be, God in my school, God when I play sports, God when I'm gaming. Like, not that it's necessarily a structured hierarchy so much
Mhm.
as my relationship with him plays a role in whatever I'm doing.
Another way that I've put it before, if it helps, is I talk about how priorities can either sit within your kingdom of heaven priority or sit outside of it, right? And
That's good.
if those priorities sit within it,
Hmm.
then beautiful things can happen with those.
Hmm.
And as we talk about the benefits of gaming, um, I would uh, I would like to point out that, okay, for 8 years, my wife and I served as academic missionaries in Moscow, Russia.
Yeah.
We ran a ministry for several years. We were always a part of it the entire time we were there, but I actually ran it for several years, called English Cafe. And English Cafe was a place where we opened up our Christian school. We invited non-believers from the community, anybody who wanted to come, believers, non-believers, from the community, who wanted to just be around other English speakers and do things in English. And you might say, this is the perfect time to hit them with the gospel. Actually, no, it wasn't.
Hmm.
You could actually get quite in trouble in Russia by inviting people to an event and then proselytizing, first of all.
Yeah.
And secondly, I have a moral problem with it. I have a moral problem with telling people, hey, come over and let's game, or come over and let's do something. And then, uh, they get there and it's like, hey, let's open our Bibles to da 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 da, right? So we would tell
Hmm.
people, hey, we're doing this event because we're Christians, and because we love people, we want to help them, learn. And you're trying to learn English, we can help you. So we're going to do that. But one of the big tools we used to build community was games. And
Yes.
in fact, there was a group of guys who got into this really heavy game called Nations that I have, that ended up being, they would come over to my house, and we were five of us all together. We would play a game of Nations, build these, it's based on history. We'd build these empires, we'd be different empires. And then, somebody would win, and we'd all laugh, and we'd go to the living room, we'd have tea. And I cannot tell you, I mean, at least 5 times that I can remember in the times that we met, sharing the gospel directly as it came up in conversation, because they
Hmm.
knew I was a believer. And when you're friends with somebody, you ask them about the things that are important to them. They just, those things just come up.
Yeah.
So gaming was a way for me to actually build community, and I would defend that still. Here at Calvary, I have students that I connect with over a board game table, I might not be able to have a connection point with them outside of that. But
Same.
sort of like designer board gaming has become very popular, and so I'm able to host nights at my house where we've had 15, 20 people all on different board game tables, and building community, building connection, building relationships. And yes, we don't want, as believers, you don't always want to be engaging in just pure entertainment every time we get together. But as a tool to help build those connections in the first place, I think it's incredibly valuable.
Hmm.
So, have you
Yeah.
noticed that in your gaming as well, in your gaming habits here at Calvary or elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a tabletop game that I play, and there are several students at Calvary who have played it over the past couple of years. I played it in high school, got out of it, got back into it with COVID because it involves a lot of modeling, and so it was something I could do when we couldn't interact with people, and now that we can interact with people more,
You might explain to people
it
what you mean
opens
by
up those
modeling.
doors. What's that?
You might explain to people what you mean by modeling.
Okay. So building tiny little plastic men,
Putting on a suit and
and
tie and
yes,
posing for the
so
camera.
building little plastic space marines and painting them. So
Aha,
there
there
we
you
go.
go.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So yes, no, I'm definitely, man, if anybody watches this and thinks I'm model quality, then wow. But other than my wife, of course. So but yes, it lets you build community, it lets you connect and build relationships in a informal way with people
Mhm.
that you might not connect with otherwise.
Right.
I recall, the when my wife and I went up to serve at Echo Ranch. This is loosely connected, but the very first time that I met the camp director at the time, one of the things that he said to me, and it really kind of still sticks with me, was that we will have a relationship, but we won't be good friends. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? Why is that? It's like, well, because we don't have anything in common. And frankly, he was right. He was a hunter. He was a sports enthusiast. I mean, he's all these things that I frankly don't have any interest in. And
Hmm.
so we actually did become quite good friends. But there is definitely a shared connection that happens over mutual interest that may not happen any other way. And that allows you to build community in an informal environment without making it forced,
There are even ministries
without it
like
being this forced, hey, come over to my house. You could say to somebody, hey, come over to my house to play a game, and they might say yes. Whereas you can say to somebody, hey, come over to my house for a Bible study, and they may, uh-uh, no.
right. Right.
And so the game can be the tool that lets you build the relationship with them. Very
Yes,
good.
yes, yes.
So,
And it's so much more comfortable tool than some other things like, I don't know, like going to a party that your neighbor invites you to and meeting somebody. If it's a party with people that don't share your values, there might be uncomfortable things. You know what I mean? It's just
mhm,
right. Gaming is a morally neutral uh and fun way. Think it's a game is in most cases a more morally neutral and fun thing that you could put on the table between two, four, however many people plays, and you're all in the same playing field. And you if you've all played the game before, you all have this sort of common language around it. It's like instant community around something that you can
yes,
connect on. And
yeah,
there are churches or Christians that are opening board game cafes. We're aware of one in Lawrence, I believe it is, that it's operated by Christians, just a place where people can come, get a
yep,
Coke and sit and play games with friends. Check games off the shelf and play them with friends. So yeah,
yeah. And
there are.
so I just, maybe just one more thing on the community aspect. So just this past weekend, I went to a tournament for a game, and I was playing this game with people that I really don't have anything in common with outside
Mm,
of this, and yet we're able to talk about their game. And then some of these conversations naturally led into, what do you do for a living, and here's what I do for a living. And
mhm.
it's just an easy way, non-forceful way to get to know people and build relationships. So
Yeah,
um
yeah,
so building community.
yeah.
When we spoke before, we came up with kind of five of these. So I'll ask you maybe to expound a little bit more. You mentioned intellectual development as one of the benefits. And so what did you mean by that?
So I'm going to share the screen for a second. I'm not quite sure what it'll do to our.
What is this?
Okay, so I've shared the screen with you. Uh, this is a this is an interesting one. You know what? I'm going to come back to this one. This goes beyond just intellectual development. This is one that I would say like is a perfect example of the kind of games my wife and I really play a lot, even two-player. It really gives us a chance to do things, something really fun on a Friday night. Instead of, turning on Netflix and having to, deal with a bunch of content that maybe you're not, and just sort of sitting back and taking in the story. We've just
True.
taken more, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but we just find it is better for our brains to play a game like this where we are all farmers uh in, I guess this would be like 18th century Britain, and we're trying to build past yeah we're trying to build out on our pasture land, and uh farm crops, and uh, herd sheep and cattle, and then get goods from those and sell them at the market. And the more that gets sold of a good at a market, the more the price goes down. So if the other player gets to the market first, it could drive the price down on something when you go to sell it. So maybe you need to sell something else at that time, so that the price in the market goes up. This is just a really, this one's a little bit what we call this in gaming a brain burner, but we really enjoy it, and it keeps us intellectually sharp. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard, you know, uh, there are a lot of people who put a lot of stock in Sudoku puzzles, working them to keep your mind
Yep.
sharp. Gaming like this can provide a very similar experience. And by the way, I'm not here to advertise any of these games, although Clemens Franz makes a lot of really good, we call these Euro games, sort of in this vein. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Do you find that to be a benefit, on the intellectual development side, Josh, as far as you're concerned in gaming?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the games that I play, the one I was at for a tournament, and yes, I'm deliberately not naming it, not because I'm ashamed of it or anything, but simply because I don't want people to get the wrong idea as they're watching this. So,
Hmm.
if you want to know, give me a phone call or send me an email, and I'll tell you. But most of the students on campus know. So, but this game involves it involves knowing your army well, knowing the stats of different people that you have that you're playing with, and how much their movement is, what their strength is, their toughness is. Those who know now know. How many attacks they have, what weapon type, etc. So there's a lot of memorization. There's a lot of strategy that goes into it. There's a lot of using this combo at this time in conjunction with this combo to make a very specific thing happen. And so there's a lot of strategy that goes into it that helps you think, it just helps your ability to think strategically.
And I'll say this too for people watching who maybe think that board games are things like Monopoly or Clue or Risk,
Ah,
or what would be another, or like Sorry or Trouble
yeah.
or any of these kids games. Okay, there are a lot of games, Shoots and Ladders and that kind of thing. uh, Gaming is really, really changing, and
Yes.
it's not just in the nerd category anymore. I can tell you that a lot of people, especially people under the age of 30 at my church, have been playing these games that are now coming out that are much more better designed, well thought through, much more strategic. Clue took a bit of deduction, but nowhere near the kind of deduction that the Search for Planet X, for example, or Alchemists is another game that like there are a lot of these games that really work the brain, that require you
Yes.
to think about logical dependencies. But what's cool is you don't have to be a genius to get into them. There are
Yeah.
easier games, and then you can progress into harder ones and harder ones. But I want to be clear, because it may be hard for somebody to imagine. Well, I don't see how playing Monopoly really develops your brain. Neither do I. That's why I don't play it. I'm not
Ah,
saying it's not a fun experience. It can be for people. I'm just burned out on it because I played it so much
it's
as a
it's
kid.
fun until somebody rage quits, right?
There you go. Yeah, yeah. But there are much better games out now than there have ever been in this hobby. We've really seen just this
Yeah.
renaissance in the past 10 years, and
I will say there is a strategy to Monopoly, and it doesn't necessarily involve buying the most expensive properties. But that's all.
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
There is some strategy there. So
yeah, yeah.
another one, right? So another one that you mentioned that I was specifically intrigued by was discussions on complex issues.
Yes.
So how does playing a game help you in discussing something complex with someone? So, and
All
you've
right.
shared
So
your screen again.
yeah, I've shared my screen because that's where I want to show you this game. It looks really dark.
Okay.
Black orchestra, and yeah, if you recognize, it's a little bit of a cartoony character of him, but on the back of the board here you actually see the pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer. This is the only board game I know of
Yeah.
where you can play as Dietrich Bonhoeffer. uh, but this is a board game set in 1936 during the plot to kill Hitler.
Hmm.
And you have a number of individuals involved here. All of you are, and it's weird because, you know, in a lot of cases you're playing people who are wearing the swastika, right? But they're actually against Hitler and they're against what he's doing, and these are
Yeah.
real people from history. And the game is really tense, and this is another concept I haven't shared with you yet, but there are a lot of games now that play cooperatively. So
Hmm.
all of
This
the
is
players
true.
who play this
Yes.
game are playing together, and you're dealing like events from a deck which show you like, you know, Hitler's going to move around, his people are going to move around. At the same time, you are trying to move to different places, gather the kinds of things you need to organize the plot, gather the players you need so that the right person can be in the right room at the right time. And when that happens, you get one shot at this enormous dice roll. But if you've done everything that you need to do, you'll have more dice in the pool to roll, and they'll hit on more faces of the die to make the attack easier. And it's this big tense moment where you roll it and you see if it hits. If it doesn't hit, somebody's going to get arrested. You may get another shot at it later in the game, but probably not. Like, this game is tense. It's tight. It builds community in a weird way because it's cooperative, but at the same time, it's a lot of tension. But it also breeds a lot of discussion. We sat around afterwards just talking about what it would be like to be Dietrich Bonhoeffer, realizing you're, in
Yeah.
essence, putting a bomb in a suitcase to kill the leader of your nation as a Christian minister. Like,
Yeah.
when is it right to do something like that? You know, and it just brings out a lot of this game just really brought out a lot of fascinating discussion around the table.
Yeah.
So, you know, I can't say there are a ton of these, but there are a good number that do this kind of thing.
That's great. And so, it creates opportunity for you to discuss that issue and then think through, were I actually in that situation, what decisions would I make? What might I have done differently? Would I have agreed that this was the right and proper approach at this time?
Right, right. You know, as long as I'm here, do you want me to just show you the other couple that I have here?
Sure.
And so, oops. Let me. Are you seeing the black orchestra on the screen?
Yes.
Clans. Okay. This one here is called Century Spice Road. You know how I talked about there are games that just aren't terribly complicated. Sorry, this is a little bit grainy here, but this is one actually I have in my office. I have it right here. You can see it, but it's uh um it's a game about spice trading along the Silk you know the Spice Road, I guess, and in you know in history, and you get it's sort of this interesting logic puzzle. There are these different objectives that you need to meet, and to meet one objective you will need, you know, 2 saffron and 3 cardamom, you know, 2 units of saffron, 3 units of cardamom, but you have to trade the spices you have, because you just started out with turmeric, so you're going to need to trade turmeric for cinnamon, the cinnamon for cardamom, the cardamom for saffron. You know what I mean? It's got this really interesting little puzzle to it, but it's not that hard. I've honestly never introduced this game to somebody who didn't within like 10 minutes go, oh yeah, I see how this thing works. And it's
Yeah, we
really
played
fun.
it once and it was pretty easy to
Yeah,
pick up.
yeah, it's pretty easy to understand. And it's a good entry point into this kind of more complex thinking, and a good community builder. It's competitive, but it's not the kind of competitive that is like take that. You know, everybody's kind of building their own thing and doing the best job they can to build their own thing. So, you know, and then another area that you and I talked about before we recorded was it's sort of like related to stimulating the mind, but a lot of these games, there are a ton of games based on history.
Yeah.
and historical simulation. And this is Undaunted Normandy, which really just deals with the complexity of moving up the beachhead and trying to land this massive invasion force into France, into German occupied France, and what it must have been like. And one side, plays the Germans by necessity, the other, plays the Allies, and you play it and you switch sides, and then you play it that way, and you see who has who's able to win in either case. But it's a tough game. But it again, you just learn a lot about history through the various events that are played. I have another great game. I don't have a picture of this one, called Twilight Struggle, which really outlines the history of the Cold War. And you learn a lot just by reading the different cards and the events on the cards. They have a lot of what we call flavor text on the cards that just gives you a lot of interesting information about the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of these things that were going on at the time of the Cold War. So it's really board games are just again a great brain stimulator.
Yep.
A great tool to spark conversations, a great tool to build community, and a great way to learn about history too, I think, as well.
Yeah, and so that opens up one of the other principles or benefits that we wanted to cover, which was education. When Tim and I were talking before, I mentioned I have a friend that I went to in high school who, when he did his student teaching, he actually brought the World War II game Axis and Allies into the classroom.
Oh, yeah.
And the students played this game while they were going through the history of World War II. And so he used, now he's using this fun experience, something they're going to remember. I mean, I guarantee they're going to remember the day that the teacher brought a board game into the classroom to play. And with that, they'll be able to remember the Axis, the Allies, who was involved, steps that happened, important events in World War II, and how those things were related to each other. So there are even games. I have one in my office called Diversify, which is created specifically to teach intercultural communication. And so I haven't used this yet, but I look forward to using this in the classroom in the fall. And it has a bunch of, basically it proposes different situations and how would you respond in this cross-cultural situation, then creates room for discussion and what would an appropriate response be. So so education is a big one. It's actually there is a term for it now. It's called gamification, but teaching using games. And so Tim, we're pretty much out of time, but I do want to touch on the last one, which the last one that we talked about before was evangelism. And so how can games open doors for evangelistic opportunities where other things might not?
Look, we live in a world, I think gone are the days where you can, set a soapbox up in the middle of town square, just start speaking and have people gather around you and listen. People are inundated with information. They're inundated with not just information, but people selling information, trying to convert you to a different point of view. I think relationship evangelism has become the norm now, not the exception. You're going to have to build relationships with people. They need to know that you're interested in being with them, in doing things with them. And how do you do that with a non-believer, right? How do you do that in a safe way with a non-believer? This is a safe way. This is a great way to establish that rapport with someone and establish a connection with someone, and then let the gospel emerge in conversation. And you would be surprised, those of you who've maybe not pursued friendship evangelism before, you'd just be surprised how natural it is. In most cases, I'm asked. I don't have to bring the subject up. So you go to church. What do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? You go to church, you believe in God. Like, why do you believe in God? Like, how can that possibly make sense to you? Well, great. The door just opened, and it opened because I have a relationship with a person. So I just would really, just I'm pumped about gaming as a way of bringing that about. So
as any way. I mean, honestly, anything, gaming is one way, sports might be a way, but it's
yep.
something that, something that you have in common is something I frequently tell my students in evangelism spiritual life. What are your hobbies? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? What are your passions? What are the things that you care about that are natural connecting points with other people? Because you're absolutely right. We live in a world today where most people have all the relationships that they really want. So why would they need? I mean, they don't, they don't need a relationship with the guy at Walmart who's checking out their groceries or whatever, right? We don't even, we can order everything online these days. And so how are you going to be intentional in building relationships with people, that will present you the opportunity to get into conversations, but conversations that aren't forced, they're natural. And those people, this is probably one of my biggest kind of pet peeves maybe, but that really helps those people understand that you care about them first. Right? I mean, nobody's going to turn to Jesus because you had a conversation with them these days, unless they know you actually care about them.
Josh, that's another big conversation, why we evangelize, but that is so true. I think a lot of times we as Christians are guilty of evangelizing for our own purposes, for trying to put a notch in our belt. We get around people, and when they seem unreceptive, we say, well, okay, let's move on then. Do we really love that person? Are we going to pursue that person? Are we going to be like Christ the shepherd who sticks with that person? Are we just going to give up because we're not getting anything out of it? So those are really, really good questions. But I think just kind of lead into the next thing we're going to be talking about.
Please do.
We realize that some of the gaming, I think maybe that's why you're reticent to share a little bit about, can I say it? Warhammer. Yeah, because we kind of wanted to separate out like the issue of gaming that touches on controversial settings.
Yes.
And topics. And we realize that's been a real issue for some believers. And I think that's an important one to address. And so
it is.
If this sparked any interest, stick with us for the next one when we address some of those controversial issues in gaming.
I really liked your I forget who you said it, but disordered loves.
Disordered loves, Tim Keller,
So that was really good, and just in the sense of. And we will address this just brief introduction, and we'll address this in the next time we tackle this topic. But we recognize, we recognize that there are controversial things associated with gaming. Like, we fully recognize that there might be controversial things associated with Dungeons and Dragons or Warhammer 40K. That's a game that I play. We recognize there are controversial elements within that. At the same time, there is a reality that anything in your life which exerts too much control over you and hinders your relationship with God has the potential to become problematic.
Right.
So that doesn't have to be a game. That could be anything that could be good. But we will cover that more. We hope you stayed with us for this topic. As always, if you have questions, you want to talk to one of us, please reach out. We mean it when we say Calvary Conversations. It's not just us talking to each other, but we want to engage with you as well. So, but we will plan on recording another, talk a little bit more about some of the controversial angle of this. But until next time, thank you everyone for joining us today.
Yes,
bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Calvary Conversations, a service of Calvary University in Kansas City, Missouri. We invite you to participate in the conversation by contacting us through the Calvary University website, calvary.edu, or by calling us at 816-322-0110. Join us again next week for another Calvary conversation.